Hello, today we are going to be talking about comparative market analysis, CMAs. These are a foundational thing that we need in our business for a lot of different purposes. So we're going to cover it from a couple of different perspectives, and I'm going to go through three different ways to create a CMA or to evaluate a property pricing for both buyers and sellers. This is super important. And so I want to walk you through the basics of how to create it and then what to do with the information once you have it. And then we'll wrap up and talk about what you can present to a client that helps them make sense of the data, because the most important thing we can do is to help with consultation and to make sure that they understand the information so that they can make an informed decision. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to do a screen share to start with the multiple listing service. If you are not already logged in, I would encourage you to pull up a browser and go ahead and log into the MLS so that you can start a search and we can get familiar with properties that are available for a CMA. From the get-go, we're going to start with a property that's already listed. If you have a listing or another property that you want to run a market analysis on, we can certainly do that as well. But the process is the same no matter which kind of property you're looking at. So for sake of samples, we're going to do a quick search. So I'm going to look for an active property that is a single family home currently. Townhomes and condos are a little easier oftentimes to do CMAs for because there aren't as many adjustments, and more often there are more like properties that need to be considered. So those are very common. But for right now, I'm going to look at properties that maybe are close to 2,000 square feet to 2,500 square feet. Now, I will talk to you about how we do adjustments once we're done. But for right now, again, we're going to just zoom in on available properties and start to find something that we can use for this comparative market analysis. The map should be working, and yet it is not. So let's put in a couple more things in here and see if we can get, there we go. Just had a little too many to show up on the map. So you can see here, this is the map of Phoenix. All of these dots will represent an active listing that is currently on the market and will allow us to do that comparative market analysis. So I'm going to randomly just pick something because we need to have a listing to work with. And so we're going to start with this one. Here we go. So looking at this, we're going to start with a couple of things that we want to evaluate. The first being the condition, the age, and the amenities of the property. These are all things that we want to take into consideration. And where I generally start is looking backwards. Then I'll look at what's current, and then I'll essentially look at what may be trending so that we can determine where prices are headed. To look backwards, the first thing we want to do is take a glance at the tax records and see what we can find. So you can click on Monsoon and it will take you right to the tax records, and that way you can start to look at the information that you have for the property. So you'll see the property address and information over here. If you scroll down, you'll also get to see the size, the lot size, rooms, living area, and other things that that you may want to know about. It will also tell you if there's a pool or an addition that could be considered. And then it will give you history of the property as well as loans and, of course, the history of the taxes. So all of those are things that you may want to research and get familiar with. For now, what we're going to do is scroll up to the top and click on comparables. We're going to go into the tax records to look back at what properties have sold that are similar, and that will give us a baseline for how to evaluate the property. This one's going to be a great one to do an evaluation on because it's a little unusual. It's in an oversized lot for Phoenix. And of course, it's an older property, which means it's got a bunch of mixed properties around the area. So this is not in a cookie cutter subdivision. That makes these a little bit easier. And hopefully what that does is it gives you a little insight into a more skillful approach to evaluating the property. With the properties that are located, first of all, we're going to set up the criteria. I like to start with choosing criteria that is going to be most similar to what an appraiser is going to use. And so that means starting with the closest comparable properties and then expanding the criteria if we do not have enough to compare. Oftentimes we need to look at what is on the comparison. So in this case, we've only got 4. Normally that might be sufficient, except that one of them is a non-MLS property. And what that means is that the appraiser can't determine if it's an arm's length transaction, and therefore it cannot be considered for the evaluation. With that, we're going to remove that property, and that leaves us only 3, which probably is not a real great amount of properties to give us a valuation. So if we can, we want to look for more. We right now have this search set up for a 1-mile radius. That's the starting point. A lot size within 20%. That is one of the things that is currently restricting our results, because as you can see, this is a very significantly sized lot. The average lot size in Phoenix is closer to 8,000 square feet. And so when you have one that's 3 times that, it certainly is going to give us less options. We also have it set to the same number of stories. There's a lot of information on that, but for sake of time, I'm just going to share that if you can, you always want to start with the same number of stories. And the biggest reason for that is that the cost to build up is less expensive than the cost to build out. And so if you have a single level home and you're comparing it to a 2-level home, the comparison isn't like for like. For right now, we've also got the built in here for 5 years. And I would say in a property that's this old, we typically want to open that up. So hopefully if we take that to 10 years or 20 years, we'll start to see more properties. So I'm going to apply that search criteria. And sure enough, we have a couple more pop up. We also have the building square footage set at 20%. Again, for most appraisers, they'll go all the way up to 30%, and they are using the same system to do their valuation when they are called out. So using this system to define either an offer price that you want to make or potentially a list price that you want to have is going to help them if you provide this data later on. You can show how you came to your conclusion as far as what the property valuation is using the same system and tools that they're using. So without further ado, we're going to move forward with choosing the properties we want to look at. I am again going to remove this non-MLS because we applied the new criteria. We have a new selection, and now we've got 5 listings. The first one on our list is going to be the closest. And again, that doesn't mean it's the most like for like comparison, but it is in proximity. And if it was built around the same time or possibly by the same builder, that's going to play into how heavily an appraiser weights it for the comparison. The nice thing about this system is that it gives you some great data to compare what is the low, what is the high, and they base it on a price per square foot. Again, that's not the end all be all, but it's good to know that the price per square foot is being used, and it's not you're taking all of these properties that may be smaller or all of these properties that may be larger and giving an average price, which could be skewed. So this somewhat modifies that and makes it more applicable. So in this particular area, you can see the price range actually goes all the way from $721,000 up to 1.14 million as an average based on that price per square foot. That's a pretty big spread. And what we typically want to do is go in here and look at the comparisons and determine, are there properties that potentially are either too low or too high that are skewing those comparables and maybe creating misinformation? And so when we look at this, we can see that, yes, almost all of these are selling in the 800. We've got one property that is significantly higher, not only in the last sale price, but also in the price per square foot. And so most often what I will do is go and look at the listing, because it's really important to know, is this comparable, or is it maybe that this one's been completely remodeled and skewing all of the comps? You can do that quickly by looking here at view listing, and you'll see this come up so that you can take a look at this other house. You can quickly thumb through the pictures and determine, okay, yeah, this home, it shows beautifully. It obviously was completely remodeled. And so maybe because our home is quite old and hasn't been extensively remodeled, we need to remove this comparable from the number that we're looking at. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and take that one off and readjust our comparables. And now we've got a comparison like this. Going back again, you can look at the pictures of this listing that we found. So by simply going to photos, you can compare and see, is this one like for like? If you look at this one and you see this is the rendering of this property and it's being completely remodeled to the likelihood of the others, now we're considering, okay, maybe that other one was the best comparable, and maybe what we need to do is to adjust our comps from the other end. So that's one thing you can do by taking a look. This is unusual again because they've given renderings, but you'd have to read the report and understand what they are doing. But they're in the middle of that remodel. The demo has been done, and they are going to have it show up as a completely remodeled property. So in that case, I'm going to add back in the one that probably is priced appropriately and look at these to see if these are of similar condition. For right now, just again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to look at every single listing and remove them out, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of how you can compare the pictures on both sets of listings to determine, is it really a property that is comparable, or maybe they're too far apart in size, style, condition, whatnot to be included. Once you have that, you now have a good range. And again, if the average price on this is $871 and we're looking at pricing a property that's going to be completely gutted and remodeled, it's probably on the higher end. Somewhere between this average and high price point is where I would likely expect this to be priced. So that gives you a good baseline. So that's the property that we are looking at for now. And that's the first step, is to look at this. The next step is to go into the MLS. So we're going to go back in and we're going to set up a search. It's going to be a custom search to compare this property. And what we're going to do is take the criteria that we have here and set it up on the search so that we can see everything else that's available. So in this case, we're looking at a 2,300 square foot property built in 74, and we're going to plug in this address. So here's where we can start. We can do a radius search. I'm going to start again with that same 1 mile radius. If we want to change that, you can go in and create a radius search maybe for 2 miles or 1.5 miles, go out 3 miles if it's a more rural area where you don't have enough criteria. I'm going to remove things like bedrooms because that's going to be accounted for in the square footage. And again, we're going to change the square footage to show the range. So in this case, if you recall, this property is 2,344 square feet. And so what I generally will do is mimic what we just looked at in the tax record. So if I'm taking that property comparatively, we're going to look at properties all the way up to 2,930 square feet now, if we're looking at the 25% margin. Same goes for this. If we've got 2,344 as we're working and we're looking at 75, we're going to take this all the way down to 1,758 so that we can see other properties that are within that 25%. We also need to add in things like the level. And this is no different than when you're setting up a search. Very important to look at that. The year built, you can again flex that. I generally will start again with 10 years and go upwards of 20 years, depending on the age of the home. So again, use your discretion to find properties that are going to give you comparable. The lot size, this is where, again, we had a 23,000 square foot lot. So if we're looking at lots that are within, again, maybe that 20-25% range, maybe go 17,000. And then we can take that up and look at, okay, what does it look like to have lots all the way up to maybe 28,000? Again, this is a balance between art and science. So you kind of have to find your rhythm and what's going to make the most sense. And you can adjust this as you go, which is a lot of fun, because if you're not getting the results you need to have enough data to compare, then you can make adjustments, like maybe add another 1,000 square feet to either end of the lot size and see if another listing comes up that you can compare. Once you have the criteria set up, I'm going to have you check the status of all the other properties. So we're going to look at the pending and the closed and the expired. And once you've looked at selecting all of those, you're also going to edit the dates. We don't want to look at everything. We want to look back typically 90 days. You can go back as long as 120, but again, especially if this is in a listing scenario and you're not getting ready to list the house this week, I would consider doing 90, because by the time you get to the point where you've listed the property, a lot of those properties that might have closed in that 90 to 100 days are now past the 120 days, and they're not really going to work well for you as far as presenting data to an appraiser or to your seller. Once you have that, we now have 23 listings. With that, you can go through and evaluate again, are these listings comparable by looking at some of the pictures or looking at some of the additional data? Again, for the sake of time, we're going to kind of push through this because I want to get you the main points and show you how we start with tax records, then move into MLS records, and then create a report, all in this short segment. If you have further questions, I invite you to certainly reach out to me, and I'll be happy to go through a deeper dive into how this works. Once we have these 23 properties, you can select all of them unless you have a specific reason not to include something. Again, there's a lot of reasons that may be. If you've got one of those odd properties that just falls outside the norm, maybe you exclude it from the data because it's an outlier and it's not going to make sense to be included. But for this example, we're going to include all of these currently and go look at the report. So what you're going to do next is click on this button that says CMA. Once you have the CMA, you have two options. You can create an actual full CMA, or you can do a quick one-click report. I love the one-click report, and so that's what I'm going to show you today, because again, we're just gathering data at this point. We can evaluate that data after we're done gathering it. So once you click on the statistical buyer CMA, it's going to give you a report that breaks down everything is active, there were no pending, everything that's closed, and everything that's expired. And it starts to break down some additional information for you so that you can see what the trends look like. So we can see from this property that there are 4 comparable listings right now, averaging 986,000 for almost the exact same square footage. That's fantastic because it gives us a really good baseline. And again, if you recall, I'm going to scoot back over to our monsoon tax reports. We had a valuation of 871 in the average and 1.1 on the high. And I said, it's probably going to lie somewhere in the middle there. It is an older property, so it's not brand new, but it has been completely gutted and remodeled, which is going to lend itself to being on that higher side. And so now we're seeing the report come in and put us right at that 941 average on here, which is right in alignment with where the tax records probably showed us we should be priced, or they should be priced. With that in mind, this gives us some good information to start from. Again, if you're making an offer, you're going to evaluate both the low and the high and do a deep dive into what is reasonable for the market, given the amount of competition and giving the type of market. If it's a buyer's market or seller's market, that's going to sway that offer, higher or lower, depending on, again, the conditions that we're facing. We also know what the competition is. So again, from a listing perspective, if you are planning to list a home, you need to know how many active properties that buyers are going to be looking at comparing to yours. If there are a lot of them in a strong market where there's a lot of inventory or supply, you may have to adjust your price down, even though the comps support a higher value, just to expedite a sale. So if you want to sell in less than the average amount of time and your seller is highly motivated, you're going to price differently than you would if your buyer is, or your seller is, willing to be patient and sit on the market for the average amount of time frame or even longer if they're willing to wait for their price. So again, there is no specific price. What we're looking at is a range based on market conditions and motivations of the parties involved. We can also see what the average days on market is. So if you have a listing that you are managing right now, and it's maybe been on the market longer than what the average days on market, it's really good to go back and reprice things regularly. You should be looking at these every 2 to 4 weeks and making sure that the pricing still stands. If there are more active listings that have come on the market, giving buyers more choice, you may have to be more aggressive in your pricing. If there are less listings, maybe you can hold and wait for the right buyer to come along. We can also see what's closed recently. Again, that's that backwards look. And so if we're looking backwards, we can see that the average is at 941, but what's active, the average is 986. That tells me the trend is still going up. That's a good thing for you to know, because again, as you're making offers or as you're listing properties, you need to know where is the market headed, not just where did it occur in the last 30 to 90 days that unfortunately most comps are represented. If for you guys, if you're looking forward, you need to know, is the market going to trend up? And if so, if you've got a buyer that's motivated, you may want to jump on this now before it gets to be a more expensive market. If you're a seller, it gives you hope that if other prices are trending up with new listings coming on the market, you have the ability to hold at your list price and wait for the right offer. We also have the ability to see what's expired. Sometimes the expireds gives us a clue into what was overpriced. In this case, not really, which is interesting. You can see that the list price of those expired listings is significantly lower. The likelihood is that those properties, given the age of that area, they were probably outdated, probably not very appealing to the general market, and therefore those were going to be properties that either needed a complete renovation and most buyers were unable or unwilling to look at making an offer, or again, they were properties that may need to even be raised because of the condition and a new build done. That's going to price out a lot of the market. And so those properties probably expired because of that. Although again, we never want to make assumptions. It's better to go look at each of those listings and verify what was the condition or what were the factors and possibly the reasoning for those not selling. Again, my hope is that this just gives you a really good overview of what's active, what potentially is pending that may be comparable, and then of course a comparison of what has closed both through the MLS with the tax records to make sure that those are somewhat in alignment. The last step is a presentation, and I am not going to go into this in huge detail, but I do want to show you a great resource that you have available. Not only do you have the ability to create a CMA report through our MLS, but through the National Association of Realtors, we have this incredible product called the Realtors Property Resource. And so if you have not used it, they have some wonderful videos and tutorials, but I wanted to give you a basic idea of what the RPR reports would look like and how you can use them. The thing that I love about RPR is it's so customizable. It also gives some great overlay information, which can help you with evaluating a property that maybe is a little more tricky to do a CMA for. So again, we're going to take this property address. In this case, we're going to enter it. So 601 East Larkspur. And we're going to see if it comes up. It sure does. We've selected that property, and then we have the ability to, oops, interesting. Then we have the ability to start refining the report and finding the comparisons. We have the ability to also look at the history and the charts. And so again, if you haven't played around with this, I would recommend that you go in and take a look at this because it can be a really great valuation. You'll see under the refined value that they already start with a basic price, which again is fairly in alignment with what we just researched both in the tax records as well as the MLS. So you can see how accurate it is just from this particular evaluation. But then you have the ability to do some great things in here to add to the value. So if you know that this particular property has had an addition or a remodel, you can go in, and as you can see, there's lots of options in here and you can add that. So in this case, I'm going to put that this has had a major kitchen renovation. We're just going to put January, and we're going to add a value. Typically, these again can range based on the size of the condition and the age. For right now, I'm just going to put $40,000 in value to give ourselves an opportunity. We'll go back in here too. And that way we can change what this property holds as far as the value. We also have the ability to add needed improvements. So if you have a property that's outdated or maybe a property that needs to be brought up to current standards, you can add the category and the cost of what it needs to be added. Another thing that you can do is refine it by the conditions of the market. Love this because again, it's a sliding scale. So if we know our local market conditions are stronger, we can just slide that up. And if we know that our property has a better curb appeal than someone else's, we can again adjust. Maybe this property is smaller than some of the others in the area. Again, you can just adjust it. We know that this particular property doesn't have much of a view. In fact, it's on a major road. So maybe we adjust down for that and for privacy because of that. And you'll see that these adjustments start to occur. We do know that the property lot size is bigger. And so again, every change you make is gonna adjust that value and change what's happening up here. So now you can see that they've refined the value to be $925. Again, really great way to just present a property, make the adjustments that you need without having to know from an appraisal standpoint, how much do I need to adjust because this property has a pool and this property doesn't, or this property has better curb appeal and this property doesn't. This system with the sliding scales will just do that for you. And if you have specific things you know a homeowner has done, perhaps they've done, in this case, a $60,000 kitchen remodel, and you can give them a valuation of maybe a 40,000 improvement, you can start to adjust appropriately for that. With that, you can then create a report. And so you now have something that most people would love to have and maybe don't know about. And hopefully you start to take advantage of this. And it's a very professional report that you can take into a listing presentation, or again, you can email to your buyer before they make an offer and decide on that offer price or the terms of the offer for a property. There are several different reports here. And again, if you want more information, I would advise you to take a tutorial, but I wanted to make you guys aware that these reports are here. With the reports, you can personalize them and you can customize them. So this is a wonderful opportunity for you to be able to create, a report that matches what your seller needs. Maybe your seller is much more detailed. They want a lot of data. Include everything. Give them what they want. Maybe they just want the bottom line. What does it look like? How do I know what the value is or what we should price at to get an offer? In that case, you can take off a lot of other stuff. Maybe historic photos don't need to be on here, or distressed information or map layers. I would just go ahead and start to remove some of the data, and then that way you can adjust the report. Once you've run it, it will generate it, and then it will give you a ping so that you'll know what's going on. You can download that, and then you can email it. I hope that was helpful to you guys. I appreciate you taking time to watch this. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out so we can go through pricing your next property. Take care.